Okay, thank you everybody for joining us today this morning. So I think we can get started. Can you all hear me clearly? Yeah, okay, thank you. Hello, my name is Kyung Ah Lee, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. I work as the International Programming Coordinator at the University of Pittsburgh, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this Hasselbein Global Academy Virtual Summit session entitled Responding to Critical Issues Sustainably, Equitably, and Thoughtfully. Please note that this session is being recorded. This workshop will feature the presenter's own experience founding a nonprofit organization to show how to respectfully and effectively respond to the issues young people care most about. This session will include a hands-on activity to practice these approaches. Participants will leave with knowledge about turning tragedy into action, engaging in sustainable organizing, and bringing original projects and ideas to life. Our presenter for this session is Kathryn Fleisher. Originally from Cleveland, Ohio, Kathryn Fleisher is a newly graduated alum of the University of Pittsburgh with a Bachelor of Philosophy degree in politics, philosophy, and gender, sexuality, and women's studies with a minor in nonfiction creative writing. She is also the founder and executive director of Not My Generation, a nonprofit committed to localized intersectional gun violence prevention advocacy, as well as the founder and co-state lead of No Cop Money PA, an organization committed to dismantling the police state by reducing the influence of police unions on elected officials in PA. Kathryn also recently finished serving as a co-chair of the Reform Jewish Movement's National Gun Violence Prevention Campaign and is also currently serving on the Commission on Social Action, the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism's governing body. Additionally, Kathryn is a 2020 Harry S. Truman Scholar, formal Gifford College Fellow, and previously interned in Senator Jackie Rosen's office. In her nearly non-existent spare time, Kathryn loves to cook, bake, hike, read, and enjoy a good podcast. Kathryn participated in the Hasselbein Student Leadership Summit in 2019 at the University of Pittsburgh. So, welcome, Kathryn.
Thank you so much. And hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for this session. Thank you for listening to my essay of a bio. I really appreciate it. But I think the most important role here that I'm holding is young person and concerned citizen, of which I think almost all of us on this call probably are. Can you also hear me? Sorry, my AirPods disconnected. Okay, cool. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about what it means to, whether it be as an organizer, as an activist, as a young person, think through what it means to take action on issues effectively and in a way that respects the needs of a particular community. So before we get started, I'm just going to ask that everybody please locate a pen and a piece of paper or something to write on and a writing utensil, whatever you use. But because a little bit later, we're going to be doing an interactive activity. So please have that nearby. Okay, before that, I'm just gonna run through a short little presentation, talk a little bit about Not My Generation, which is the nonprofit organization committed to localized intersectional gun violence prevention advocacy for young adults that we mentioned earlier. So hopefully this will be about 10 minutes just to get a little bit of an idea about the nonprofit itself, what we do, why we do it, and how we got to where we are. And then we will go ahead and do an activity that will call on you to kind of tap into the things that you care about and run through a similar type of planning process. Next slide, please. So we already talked about me a little bit, so I'm not going to go through this, but basically the long story short is I've been organizing for 6 years since 2015. When I was a teenager in high school, I first got exposed to the gun violence prevention movement when I was in Jewish youth group, when I heard from a survivor of the Virginia Tech shooting. And his story of being a survivor and living through this tragic incident that like changed the course of his life and his classmates' lives really highlighted the issue of gun violence to me and brought me into the movement in a way that has, that I've retained ever since and, learned more. Unfortunately, gun violence has become more personal and close to my own life. But that was kind of my entry point. Next slide, please. Just for a little bit of background on gun violence itself, because I never pass up an opportunity to do a little bit of education. Gun violence can mean a lot of different things. Often we just think of it as meaning mass shootings, but in reality, gun violence also looks like community violence, hate crimes, police violence, domestic violence, suicide by firearm, accidental shootings, and the like. Almost all of these forms of gun violence disproportionately impact communities of color, low-income communities, and other marginalized groups. Interestingly, different kinds of vulnerable communities are vulnerable to different kinds of gun violence. So for instance, low-income rural communities are particularly susceptible to suicide, while more urban vulnerable populations are more vulnerable to community violence. We also know that, well, it's raised now, this says 38, but it's more like 40,000 Americans die each year from gun violence, which is about 100 per day. About an estimated 3 to 4 of those each day in America are children. Also, fascinatingly and terrifyingly, America does have more guns than citizens. So even if you gave a gun to every person in the United States, you would still have more left over, I think, which really tells you a lot about our priorities in this country. And even though the US accounts for only 4% of the world's populations, we have 35% of global firearms suicides. And in general, gun violence in America is incredibly specific to our country. It's a uniquely American problem. So for those of you who are from other countries, definitely be curious to hear, how gun violence as an issue sounds and resonates to you as someone who doesn't face this kind of epidemic. Especially considering Americans are 25 times more likely to be killed in a gun homicide than people in other high-income countries. Next slide, please. So, cool. So then I just wanted to share a little bit about Not My Generation. So as I mentioned, we're a localized intersectional organization. We try to do gun violence prevention work across a variety of issues. We try to understand gun violence not only as an issue in and of itself, but as a symptom of wider systemic injustices related to race, class, and gender. So in our work, we are committed to creating and convening diverse intersectional coalitions in partnership with young people. And we use this coalitional model to ensure that young, diverse individuals are represented in their community's GVP efforts. And so that we're looking at the issue of gun violence as the deeply intersectional issue that it is. And then not only do we, focus on gun policy and on those other factors related to race, class, and gender, we also work on those issues because they not only exacerbate, but in some ways create the gun violence epidemic. It's not just about firearms. Next slide, please. So the way we do this with our coalitions, that we have regions, we have 8 of them across the country, and we have coalitions within those places. We have like regional field coordinators who work with coalitions in these respective areas. They help manage kind of our projects and our initiatives, passing down opportunities and resources and trainings. So we're really a grassroots organization, and our main goal as a national organization is to support our local organizers. Next slide, please. Just to highlight some of our more notable projects, so this sounds a little bit less theoretical, because of course all organizing is in some ways theoretical, but it's also tangible and it's people's lives. So some of the pieces that we do in this advocacy work, we create state fact sheets and an annual advocacy guide on gun violence and being a gun violence prevention organizer. Around election time, we create state voter guides and ran a Get Out the Vote campaign. We've run some Justice for Black Victims of Police Violence virtual phone banks, pressuring local elected officials to either release information or properly fire or terminate the employment of officers who have harmed Black residents. We also facilitate a virtual organizing community. We've produced a podcast called Root Causes if you're interested in the way that gun violence intersects with other issues. Something a little bit more obscure, like we have one on like environmentalism and race and gun violence prevention. We have one on Black mental health and gun violence prevention. So if you're interested in learning more, definitely check out Root Causes. It's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. We also host a bunch of educational events and resources, training opportunities, as well as supporting partner organization events. We also recently released a 80-page policy playbook called Depolicing GVP, thinking through what gun violence prevention looks like without a reliance on the police and prison state. So if you're interested in that at all, you don't have to read all 80 pages. There's some summaries. You can head to depolicegvp.org to learn more. We also are having our second annual Summit for Young Adults Against Gun Violence this upcoming November. So if any of these issues and this work resonates with you, please stay in touch. I will ensure that these PowerPoint slides get to whomever is able to send them out. On the last slide is some contact information for me. Please be in touch. We would love to have you at the summit. It will be low to no cost for young organizers, and we're looking for people from all over the country. So if you are a US resident, please consider joining us for that in November. Next slide, please. This is the part I really wanted to highlight for you, as it's probably the most relevant to what we're doing here today. But I wanted to give you a background on Not My Generation so that I could talk to you a little bit about what the experience of founding it was like. I founded the organization in the wake of the 2018 Tree of Life shooting as a Jewish student at the University of Pittsburgh. During the Tree of Life shooting, it was a really difficult and traumatic experience to be part of. And in the wake of that tragedy, I found myself not being able to really do much of anything, eat, sleep, shower. Everything just felt wrong when so many people had been harmed in my community and lost. And I realized in that moment that really the only thing that felt okay to me as a human being was organizing, right? Like it was the idea of taking this horrible tragedy that had happened and finding opportunities and ways to channel my anger and my grief and my fear into something more productive that would prevent other communities from having to go through that. I was also particularly inspired by the way that the Pittsburgh community came together across lines of difference to show up for the Jewish community after that tragedy. Particularly the Muslim community really showed up for the Jewish community and really saw the power in that, saw the power in intersectional coalitions, and kind of felt, why do we not build these coalitions proactively so that we're not just retroactively responding to tragedy, that we are proactively trying to keep our communities safe, make them more whole and just, without necessarily needing to have a loss of life in the community to be able to have a reason to come together. So that's kind of where the values for NMG came from. At first, starting the organization was truly just me and my laptop. I started putting together some documents. I put down my goals. I put down things I wanted to see. I put down people I knew who were in the space. And I just started cold calling and cold emailing, like organizer friends, big gun violence prevention organizations, friends who were interested in social justice work. And basically I just ran through my idea with them and asked, like, does this already exist? How can I create a unique space to do this work? Should I get on what someone else is doing, or should I run ahead with this? And to everyone that I talked to, I also asked at the end of the conversation, if this comes to fruition, will you be a part of it? And ultimately this process of, exploration and learning really allowed NMG to start building partnerships with established organizations, to build relationships with stakeholders who have particular insight, whether they be survivors, whether they be families of victims. Also allowed me to have input on what the organization is and what it stood for, so that it wasn't just my project, but so that it was the movement and the community's project. And then also ultimately that's what yielded personnel to help bring it to life, because nobody can make change on their own. And if you're trying to, you probably need to expand your network, because no change happens in a vacuum, and you'll need people from all different walks of life with all different skill sets and all different networks to bring whatever your goals are to life. And then from there, we worked on event planning and team building. And in that process, kind of fleshed everything out. We're still fleshing things out. I mean, I think having some flexibility when you have a new organization who's trying to meet needs of a disparate community, that it's really important to be flexible. But we started planning our 2019 Summit for Young Adults Against Gun Violence, which is like the first big thing that Not My Generation did. And ultimately through that process, we created a mission and a vision for our work. We brought in 125 youth organizers to be part of it. We established who we wanted to be and how we wanted to get there. And then really since we hosted that event in November of 2019, we've really just been trying to learn, grow, and expand our work and how we do it. So basically the four big pieces that I outlined here that in my opinion are kind of like what you need to start part of a movement, found an organization, take an action or start an initiative within an existing program. It's 4 steps. First, you have to identify the need. Second, you have to embrace a process of exploration and learning. Third, you start to take action. And then fourth is you go back and you relook at everything you've done. You bring your team together, you set new goals that are in line with the work you've done, and you start the whole process over from the beginning of ensuring you stay close to your need, doing more exploring and learning, bringing more people into the work, taking the action you need to, and then again, reflecting on it all. Next slide, please. Again, this is just some contact info as well as some information on Not My Generation, as well as gun violence prevention generally, if it's something that you are interested in learning about. We'll send these slides your way after so you can take a look. But now that you've listened to me talk at you for about 15 minutes here, I want to transition into thinking about like what this means for your own work and your own leadership. So if everyone could get out that pen and pencil that you have, we can turn off the presentation. So basically today what we're going to be doing together is talking a little bit about kind of what you care about and why, and what you can do with that information. So as you heard, when I was talking about the work that my nonprofit does, I didn't necessarily start by telling you what we do. I started by telling you a story about myself, a story about the communities I care about, a story about things that my community has been through, that I've been through, that people I love have been through. And the reason I did that is because I ascribe very deeply to the idea that there is power in starting with why. And if you've never heard of him, he's very famous, so you probably have already, but if you're not familiar with Simon Sinek, he is a phenomenal leadership coach and author. He has a TED Talk called Start With Why that I would highly recommend. But basically the gist of it, if you don't want to watch the 18-minute video, is that people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. So in his talk, Simon Sinek gives examples of, Apple, right? And that they don't just come out and say, hey, we believe in, or, we have these computers, they're easy to use, they're sleek, you should buy one. They start with the why of what they're doing. They say, we care deeply about ingenuity and innovation and performance that makes you feel inspired. Thus, we made these computers that are sleek and fast. Would you like to buy one? And so basically the whole idea behind it is that you have to focus on why you are doing what you're doing, because people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. So all that being said, what does this mean for organizing? What does this mean for leadership? What does this mean for community service? Well, it can mean a lot of things. So for the rest of this activity, I'm going to ask you all to pick an issue that you care deeply about. It can be something specific to your home community. It can be your school community. It could be something you've experienced, something you love has been experienced. I know we all care about many, many issues, but for the purpose of this activity, please just pick one. Think about it. Once you know what you're going to choose, feel free to go ahead and jot it down. And then we're going to go around really quick. Not everybody has to talk, but if you want to share, I would love to hear. If you could just quickly tell us what you picked, why, and then also one concern you have about acting on it. And the reason I ask you to do that is because if you'll notice when I talked about my nonprofit, I really highlighted the opportunities that we had to continue learning and growing and assessing what we do and how we go about it. Because if we care deeply about equity and sustainability, which anyone taking action on any kind of issue ultimately should, because that's how you build, respectful coalition. That's how you do culturally sensitive work. That's how you, move things forward. We have to be able to name our concerns so that we can address them and grow. So here, I'll just give you a quick example now that you know me and my work. I'll just give you an example of what that might look like, and then I'll be quiet so some of you can share. So here's an example of the issue, why you care about the issue and a concern. So for me, I care deeply about gun violence prevention, and I care about it because I believe deeply in the importance and power of building safe, just, and equitable communities. My concern about doing this work is that I am a young, white, middle-class woman in this work involved in a movement that disproportionately impacts people of color, and I struggle with my role in doing that in an equitable manner. So that's an example. Does anybody want to share? You can just jump in.
Hey, Kathryn, I can take a stab at it. My name is Kavya Pachpalusu, and I think an issue that I'm really passionate about is specifically like education and prevention and working with minority communities, especially in the healthcare field. And why I think it's important, especially from an education standpoint, is because I think, historically there's been a lot of mistrust with Black communities and minority communities and healthcare in general for good reason. And I think through education, we can kind of provide a more sustainable and generational outcome towards healthcare, not just from, like you said, a reactionary standpoint, more of a prevention standpoint, and really noticing these trends that we see in these communities and why they're there. And concerns that I have, similar to what you said, I am still an immigrant. I have an Indian descent, and I understand what it's like to be a minority, but obviously Asian minorities are kind of looked at as a higher standard, unfortunately, in the United States for some reason. So understanding the differences in my identity and really working towards advocating for those communities, again, from a DEI standpoint, is a concern that I have. And what stance do I do? And also acknowledging the fact that I have a lot to learn because I have a lot more to empathize with these communities.
That was perfect and incredibly insightful. Thank you so much for sharing. Does anyone else want to voice theirs?
I'd be happy to as well. Hi, Kathryn. So the issue I care about is like individualized education and education that like is best for you, both for your knowledge and your goals, but also like is financially accessible to you. And why I'm passionate about that is one of the things like I credit to my upbringing is the educational opportunities I've had and on the path that I've had. My parents are both public school teachers, so I've kind of known the importance of education since I was born, pretty much. And my concern, kind of going along with what I just mentioned, is I'm very fortunate to be on the end where my pursuit of knowledge and my economic status has not been an obstruction in my educational opportunities, but it also, like, the communities that are affected by this probably also have a very much different perspective than just the benefits.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for taking us inside your connection to that issue, Ryan. Can we maybe have one more person share what they're thinking about?
Hi, I'm Amelia Sargent, and I've been thinking a lot lately about sustainable community engagement, incorporating environmental education into that. People throw around like the word sustainable a lot, and like I've been thinking about what that means to me and how it can be related to communities as well as to the environment. And I think it's tricky to just like understand someone's perspective and like combine that with my own, and then combine that with the communities, as well as working with everyone instead of just like coming into an area and just being like, all right, this is what needs to happen. And understanding that communities have needs that aren't necessarily understood by everyone, and it's very difficult to understand one if you're not part of that. So the idea of just like incorporating like someone's experience with someone's needs and working together, I think that's what I would like to learn more about and what I would like to do.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing with us. It's clear to me that you all are very careful and thoughtful about the type of work that you're doing and why it's important to you. And that, to be fully honest with you, is probably the hardest step, because understanding that you are not the center of the universe and the authority on other people's lived experiences or the issues that them and their community uniquely experiences is probably the thing that people struggle with most in doing meaningful and sustainable organizing work. And so I think the way that you all are going about thinking about these things and asking these questions is a phenomenal first step. And I'm going to essentially raise what I would urge you all to consider as your second step in thinking through what work you're doing and how you're going about it. And that second step is through a process called power mapping. People do this in a couple of different ways. It can look a couple of different ways, but the reason that I love power mapping, and I'll kind of explain what it is in a minute, is because it allows you to understand who is in your circles. It allows you to know who's being most affected by an issue. So who you have to like go to first and learn from and center in your work. It helps you understand what kind of access to power access to resources you or organizations you intend to work with have. And it's just a really incredible tool for, being able to think about your work in context of other people's work and the world around you. Because in reality, there are people everywhere who are doing good work. And if you have something unique to bring to the table, it is so important to fit it into the wider context and ecosystem of change makers to be part of the general movement forward towards progress. And power mapping is a tool to help you figure out where you fit in. So generally, power mapping is a visual tool that's used by social advocates to identify the best individuals to target in promoting social change. I would argue it is also a best practice for understanding what communities are closest to, whatever pain, trauma, injustice you're working to address. And the role of relationships is really central in the idea of power mapping, as well as networks. And that really, again, is at the heart of being able to effectively make change, to work in coalition with other folks, and to collectively move our communities and our work forward. So basically using a power map proves to be a very useful tool in finding a way to systematically think through who has power, who has relationships, who has relevancy, expertise, sway, etc., in terms of who you are and what you're trying to influence. Power mapping is also just generally a useful tool for visualizing your own place in the work and ensuring you're going about such an equitable, thoughtful, and intentional manner. So this is where the hands-on part comes in. We're going to do a little bit of power mapping together. I would typically draw and like show you as we go along, but again, I am at work, so I do not have access to that right now. So you'll just have to listen close, but hopefully you all have paper and pens in front of you and we can walk through this together. So to power map, the first step is to identify a goal. You all have already identified an issue you care very deeply about. So I'm just going to ask you to turn that issue into a quick goal. So a goal should be specific, should be time bound, and should be attainable. So go ahead and take a look at your issue and write out a goal that goes along with it. So for example, I'll use my work again for gun violence prevention. Maybe I write, I want to reduce suicide by firearm by 25% or something along those lines. It could be like, I want to implement X policy by Y date, or I want to change A thing in B way by C time. So go ahead and identify that goal and write it down. I'll give you just a few seconds here. Just focus on that. once you have a goal, we're now going to identify a target. A target is basically who has the like ultimate decision-making power in achieving whatever goal it is that you identified. Obviously, there will be a lot of people who have a say. There will be a lot of people who are able to make change. But who is like one person that has real ultimate authority, whether it's, you know, the chancellor of a school who can implement a different policy, whether it's a specific lawmaker who can co-sponsor a bill somewhere, whether it's a teacher or an administrator who can implement a curriculum of some kind. There are tons and tons of folks who could be the target, but it's important that you name a specific person or a specific position so that this exercise works properly. So again, just go ahead and take a few seconds to think through that and go ahead and write that person's name down or their position. Okay, so once you have your goal and your target down, I want you to draw a graph. So just do an XY axis, you know, 4 quadrants. Obviously, like like one of these. On the x-axis, I'm going to tell you what labels. So we're going to do the far left side of the x-axis. Go ahead and label that against you. On the far right side of the x-axis, so the other side, write for you. So now basically we have like a linear scale of like against you to for you. So now we're going to label the y-axis. So at the very bottom of the y-axis down here, label it no influence. And then at the very top of the y-axis, go ahead and label that big influence. Once you have this all labeled, I want you to take note about how each quadrant is now a different kind of power dynamic. So first, in one of the quadrants, you have against people who are against you and who have a big influence. That's like at quadrant 2. Math was a long time ago. Hi, everybody. I'm so sorry about that. My phone did not enjoy overheating, so apologies. I'm not sure when you all lost me. Can someone, did you all at the point when you have all of your axes labeled?
Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. So we were just noting different kinds of power dynamics. So we have folks who are against you and who have a big influence on your target. Next to the right of that, we have the quadrant that are folks who are for you, who are on your side and who have a big influence against your target. And then in the bottom left, you have folks who are against you, but who have little influence. And then to the right, you have folks who are with you, who have little influence. So basically there's 4 different kinds of general dynamics. And of course there's people who have different, levels of that, and it's along a scale. But those are the 4 main types of folks that are going to be involved in your work. So the next thing I want you to do is quickly make a list of the key players who might be involved in your issue. This is really probably the most important step. And if you're doing this in a longer way, I would encourage you to kind of use like a multi-day timeline to really vision out every single key player you can think of, whether it's an organization, a movement, institution, friend, a family member, it doesn't matter. Create a list of your key players. For now, I would say since we only have a few minutes, just go ahead and jot down maybe 5. It could also be different kinds of stakeholders. So I know a couple of folks mentioned being interested in education. Some of your stakeholders and your key players might be students, parents of students, teachers associations, administrators, like people like that. Basically, this is your list of people who might have influence over the target that you've identified, and who might have a say in the decision-making process. Once you have your key players written down, what we're going to do is plot them on the graph. Basically, I ask you to think critically about where each key player falls on your map, and to what degree. So I would figure out first, which quadrant do they fall into? They have a lot of influence, little influence. Are they against you or are they for you? And then you can just go ahead and, draw a little dot on your XY axis or your XY graph and label them. Obviously, this is not an exact science, so use your best judgment and remember that these plots should be considered and drawn in their relationship with and influence over your target, not your relationship or influence over you. So go ahead and take a minute or 2. Think critically about what key players you've identified. Think a little bit about what their relationship is to your target. Think a little bit about where on your graph they fall. And just throw those plots on there. Give you another few seconds. So once you've done that, you can really consider yourself having completed a basic form of power mapping. Obviously, this should be a lot more robust. But the next step, if you want to take a more advanced approach, which I highly recommend since all of you are intelligent people who care very deeply about the work that you do, the next step would be to create basically a key for yourself that will help you define different types of relationships. So what I usually do is use a straight line for one, a dotted line for another, like a squiggly line for a different kind of relationship, or if you colored pens, like red for one, blue for another, so on and so forth. And the reason that you are identifying these different kinds of relationships is because you want to know what those power dynamics are like, right? So you want to ask questions like, who funds whom, who elects whom, who works for whom, who feels a certain way about whom, so that you can understand how to utilize those relationships or how to navigate those relationships if they're against you to benefit whatever your ultimate goal is. So you can feel free, if you have a minute, to draw relationships between either your different stakeholders, or if you plot your target right in the middle, to draw what kind of relationships exist between your stakeholders and your target. Once you've done all of that, which I hope you've been able to keep up. I hope it wasn't too fast. But hopefully this showed you a little bit about what it looks like to create one of these maps so that then you can review and evaluate your completed map. In doing so, it's important to think about how to utilize these relationships that you've identified, how to build effective coalitions, and to leverage existing power dynamics or power dynamics that you can build upon based on what you see on your map in order to influence your target and achieve your identified goal. Obviously, this is a vast simplification of the really complicated issues we're all working under, but it's a really useful tool for thinking through what those relationships look like, what your role is in them, and how to visualize these super complicated relationships and power dynamics that we ultimately have to navigate when we're looking to make change and when we're looking to do so equitably in a way that centers people who are most impacted by the issues that we work on. So that is kind of the long and short of it. I know we went pretty long, so I think we only have 2 or 3 minutes, but if anyone has like a question or two, either about this work, like power mapping that we just talked through, or about my experience founding a nonprofit, I'd be happy to take a question or two. And if not, no worries at all. I just talked at you for a while.
Okay, so we really want to thank Kathryn for their presentation this morning. Thank you as well to all of you participants who have joined us today. At the conclusion of the summit, you will receive an email with a link to a survey. We ask that you please complete the survey at your earliest convenience to share some feedback about your learning experience today. At this time, we encourage you to transition to your next session using the Zoom link, which are located in the summit program. Thank you so very much and hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate your energy and attention. Take care.